Hello and welcome to another session of Kop Talk, a program featuring two Jews offering their views on the news. I am Bob Cohn, the Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of the St. Louis Jewish Light, and with me as always is Larry Levin, the publisher and CEO of the Light, and as always our producer and managing editor Mike Sherwin. Larry, there is so much going on as we begin the Jewish New Year, it's hard to know where to begin, but perhaps the top worldwide story since our last Kop Talk program is the fact that the United States and its European and Arab allies have been launching airstrikes on ISIS targets, not only in Iraq, but in the case of the U.S. on Syria. What is your own feeling about how well the air campaign is going? And do you agree with House Speaker John Boehner and others that eventually there will have to be American boots on the ground?
I don't know from a military perspective. I mean, I think one of the things that has been understated is the extent to which the United States has been able to build a coalition of Western and Middle Eastern partners in this endeavor. Because now, rather than it looking like a war on a religion, it looks like basically a war between what I call structurally organized and somewhat democratic, but not all, countries and those who are using kind of anarchic and sadistic tactics to basically undermine civilization and society. What do you think?
I agree with the fact that it was excellent that there was a truly international coalition, that Great Britain and its parliament came on board. We've got countries like Jordan and Saudi Arabia fighting alongside of us. But the new Prime Minister of Iraq, I was shocked that he criticized the participation of the very other Arab countries that we need to take part. He's sort of a clone of Maliki, who they struggled for nearly a year to get out of there.
Right.
So that's worrisome.
And Turkey continues to kind of equivocate. Somewhat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, Erdogan is what they used to call a tower of jelly. So, meanwhile, at the United Nations, President Obama, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have offered their annual remarks to the UN General Assembly. Bibi met in the White House with Obama just yesterday. Do you detect any hopeful signs in those speeches, or were they essentially the same old, same old? We'll talk about the White House.
Well, I think Bibi is now embarked on a strategy, and the strategy is to say to what he considers the more moderate or temperate Arab nations, join us in this basically assault on radical Islam and radical Islamism, I should say. And I think since he has embarked on that path, I think it's important from his perspective, to play nicey-nice with the United States president, to gain his support in encouraging the same level of support. And Obama also, is trying to walk a path, between supporting Israel and also gaining the support of maybe some of these on-the-fence Arab nations. Once again, we saw the aftermath in Jerusalem, where the mayor of Jerusalem where it was announced and the mayor of Jerusalem approved some housing in East Jerusalem, right on the aftermath of the Bibi-Obama meeting. It always seems like it's that way, right? Although this time it's a little bit different because Mayor Nir is head of a municipality. He's not the housing minister, so this is more like, I think, the governor of Missouri, trying to talk to the city of Chesterfield and telling them what to do.
Yeah, these announcements, they're in the pipeline, and it might have been the time to make the announcement anyway, but they always seem to be timed to kind of throw some red meat towards Bibi's right flank. And I agree with you, Jerusalem is in a category
it's a little different
all by itself.
It is, and in fact, this housing development is projected to be, intended to be a third set aside for Arab residents. So is this a positive thing or a negative thing? That it was both announced and that it was rebuffed. So we'll just have to see how that plays out.
Historically, one of the little footnotes is that the ancient Jewish quarter had been destroyed by the moderate regime in Turkey, between 48 and 67.
Well, that's right.
So, page one story, again, shifting gears to something a little bit different. And the New York Times was headlined, "Anti-Semitism in Europe Comes Out of the Shadows." In your opinion, has the line between anti-Israel protesting and outright attacks on Jews as Jews been essentially erased in different parts of the world? And what about the spate of anti-Jewish actions, especially the aftermath of the Israel-Hamas conflict?
Well, I think the most hateful factions have seen the Gaza war as an opportunity to spread hatred generally against Jews. And so it creates a really important question. How can you have safe space to talk about Israel and about different tactics that Israel has taken with respect to the territories, with respect to other issues, without being branded an anti-Semite? And it's really a tough situation, because there are people who, and we've written about this in recent weeks, there are people who say, obviously Israel has the right to defend itself. Obviously Israel has a 100% right to safety and security, just like anybody else, but I may not agree with all of their tactics. Don't ask me to say 100% that I know with certainty that the IDF behaved perfectly, correctly, in the Gaza war, or that I agree with the notion of enhanced settlements in the West Bank. Right now, the line is so blurred on what comprises legitimate criticism of Israel, legitimate meaning talking about technical issues like that, versus I hate Jews, that we are in a period that's very dangerous.
And we had an editorial recently where we criticized Israel rather sharply. We were both on the same page in the criticism of putting up the acquisition of that land in the Etzion block, and the timing of that was egregious. It's very important between the two bookends of the Israel could do nothing right and the Israel could do nothing wrong bookends, that we discharge our responsibility as Jews who love Israel at running a Jewish newspaper and criticize Israel as needed and praise it as needed.
And there are people who take the hardline tactic that if you're afar and you're not living there, if you're an American Jew, wherever you are, you really don't have the right to criticize, and it's like, I don't really subscribe to that view.
I don't either. I used to subscribe to it, but when the right wing took its turn at criticizing Israel, and when they had said the opposite. So
those who say that, usually it ends up being a political, an opportunity for a political statement on their part.
How do you explain the fact that the most recent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has held for so long, and that when a rogue rocket attack was launched against Israel by a splinter group, Hamas punished the rocket launchers? Is there something going on we don't know about between Israel and Hamas?
Most of the critical analysis you read says Hamas does not want to pick a fight right now. Hamas is at low ebb. Hamas is being blamed even within Gaza for a lot of the stuff that happened. You read some of the quotes from Gaza residents who mostly talk anonymously, of course, for fear of their lives. But they say we didn't have to be in that mess. Hamas chose to create the conflagration. It could have stopped. Instead, we had utter destruction and death, and a lot of it Hamas was responsible for. So I think they have a political battle. I think their finances are depleted. I think they're being hurt by ISIS, because there are a lot of people who are conflating kind of the goals of Hamas with the goals of ISIS, even though ISIS has been operating on a larger stage. Right. So what do you think?
There is a tremendous amount of validity to everything you said, and I'm reminded of what Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, said after that conflict. He would never have launched the rockets against Israel to start that war if he knew how devastating it would be for Hezbollah. So I think Hamas, despite the fact that they celebrated a quote-unquote victory, really did take a severe blow. They don't have Egypt on its side anymore.
Right. Turkey's
got other fish to fry. They're kind of on their own.
But you do raise an interesting point about Hezbollah, which is what's going to happen on the northern border of Israel and the Golan Heights. And is there risk between ISIS, between Hezbollah, between anarchy, that on the northern border we're going to see more unrest akin to what we've seen in Gaza? I don't know.
Exactly. The Jewish Light this week has a page one story of the apparent warming of relations, quote unquote, between the United States and the regime in Iran, and it's making Israel nervous that the U.S. may be making too many concessions to Iran on its enrichment of uranium in exchange for a greater lifting of sanctions against Iran. Do you believe that we can really trust the Iranian regime when its supreme leader continues to insist that it will not give ground on these issues?
No, I don't necessarily believe that the United States is softening on Iran. I mean, I think we have a wait and see to go here. If the contention is the United States would agree to a number of centrifuges and continuing enrichment activities that would allow for the creation of weaponry, I'm very skeptical that they're going to agree to anything to that effect. I mean, we finally do have some IAEA acknowledgement of some veracity as to some of the inspections, which is a good, if not a first. Certainly doesn't happen very often. It's a good time for there to be the makings of a deal if Iran wants them. But I don't think the U.S. is gonna go light on that. What do you think?
Well, I'm reminded of our friend David McCoskey, who's from St. Louis, and who said that he's worried about too late. No, not yet. Oops, too late.
Yeah.
That as long as Iran can game the process,
Right.
they could continue to enrich and develop and move towards.
Absolutely, and if they don't have a deal, by this November, which is what the extended
Right.
deadline, then fine, go back to the hard line, and I have no problem with that. And put the sanctions, which are still very high, by the way, put the sanctions back at the level that they were at, and let the chips fall where they may. So.
There's a St. Louis, we have so much we could talk. We could talk about Ebola. We could even talk about Hong Kong and about the Secret Service. There's just a plethora of news items that could take up 6 Kop Talks. But as the St. Louis Jewish community celebrates the New Year 5775 with such grim news swirling around us, around the globe, right here in St. Louis with Ferguson, is there anything positive and optimistic? I'm putting you on the spot. Give some hope to our readers and viewers as we sign off.
Well, I think out of the terrible ashes of the Ferguson situation comes the opportunity to restore and rebuild interfaith relations and inter-community relations, which you've been very involved with for many, many decades in St. Louis. It is terrible. Roger Goodell, who runs the NFL,
right.
tried to make it sound like it was a good thing that he had this scandal because now the NFL can look forward, which was a little bogus. But I do think that sometimes it takes terrible, terrible news, such as what happened with Michael Brown in the aftermath, for us to look seriously and critically and say, have we really been ignoring things that we should have been looking at for a long, long time? Or at least have we been putting them on the back burner? Or have we deluded ourselves into thinking that they are not as bad as they actually are? Clearly, when one instance, one situation causes a conflagration like we saw in Ferguson, it tells you that everything is percolating, simmering just below the surface. And it's really, really terrible. So if we can use this as a springboard for better understanding, better respect, better use of resources to help people, then I won't say it will have been worth it, absolutely not, but it definitely will move us in the right direction.
I'm in agreement with that very positive note on which to end this session of Kop Talk, and we certainly join in wishing our readers a happy and healthy and fulfilling New Year.
5775, baby. Bye.
There you go. Like that went